For decades, America has congenital its global adeptness on one simple idea. The world needs American administration to work properly, from barter systems to military deals, from technology rules to democratic values. Washington has put itself at the centermost of everything. The entire all-around adjustment was advised with America authoritative the breeze of ideas, money, and adeptness above the world. This setup formed able-bodied back-ascent nations, either abutting American interests, or could be chock-full through economic pressure and adept isolation. But India's dispatch creates a claiming that America never saw coming. Unlike China, which runs on absolute ascendancy and can be labeled as an enemy, India forces America to face a harder truth. Here is a democracy, the world's largest democracy. Ascent to all-around power without allurement, American permission, or copying American methods. India's success threatens to breach the basic story that has kept American dominance alive for years, that commercialism and growth charge Western guidance. The worry goes added, then aloof competition. India represents article that American planners never expected. A non-Western nation accomplishing avant-garde success while keeping its own identity. This is not about artful American models or joining American-led groups. This is about creating an altered aisle to power, one that added nations in the developing world are watching closely. And that possibility keeps Washington worried. America's accord with democracy has consistently been selective. Washington supports autonomous movements back they help American interests and accepts dictatorships back they serve American goals. This activated access to democratic ethics has accustomed America to keep moral ascendancy while pursuing strategic objectives. The adventure was simple. America knows best how democracy should assignment, and added nations should follow American advice to achieve democratic success. India's democratic experiment destroys this story completely. With over 1.4 billion people, hundreds of languages, multiple religions, and huge bread-and-butter differences, India manages to ascendancy, chargeless and fair elections, advance non-combatant, control over the aggressive and assure basic rights admitting astronomic challenges. The size and complication of Indian democracy make American commercialism attending about easy by comparison. Yet India achieves this without American teaching or approval. What makes this decidedly threatening is that India's commercialism is not built the silent abhorrence of India's rise on Western ideas. It draws from ancient concepts of accumulation decision-making, spiritual assortment, and civilizational tolerance that existed afore Western democratic access by bags of years. Indian commercialism includes village councils, accord architecture, traditions, and across-the-board baby-minding practices that offer altered models for democratic participation. This suggests that democracy is not an American invention, but an animal admiration that can booty many forms. Furthermore, India's democratic strength during crisis exceeds that of many Western nations. While established democracies struggled with division, institutional breakdown, and accessible trust problems, India has maintained democratic chain through wars, economic upheavals, and amusing changes. Indian commercialism has survived military threats, agitator movements, natural disasters, and all-around bread-and-butter shocks while continuing to advance and adapt. The implications are massive for American-adopted policy. If India can succeed democratically after American guidance, again, the absolute apriorism of American autonomous administration becomes questionable. Countries seeking democratic transitions may attending to New Delhi rather than Washington for inspiration and support. This shift would attenuate America's bendable power advantage and abate its adeptness to shape all-around political development. More importantly, India's success proves that there are assorted paths to democratic governance. The American archetypal of liberal democracy, alone rights and market commercialism, is not the alone way to organize the acknowledged democratic society. India's Access, which blends traditional accord architecture with modern ballader systems, offers a viable alternative that may be added suitable for assorted developing societies. This creates an existential claiming for American all-around strategy. America's entire access to international relations depends on actuality, apparent as the ultimate autonomous authority. If that authority is questioned, America's ability to advance coalitions, justify interventions, and advance alliances becomes acutely weakened. India's democratic dispatch does not aloof compete with American power. It challenges the foundation of American legitimacy. America's all-around ascendancy has always depended on its adeptness to influence, pressure, or ascendancy arising powers. Whether through bread-and-butter sanctions, military alliances, intelligence operations, or adept isolation, the U.S. has maintained ascendancy over the global adjustment by ensuring that rising nations abide based on American systems. Alike adversaries like China can be managed through barter relationships, technology restrictions, and international pressure. India presents a fundamentally altered challenge. It refuses to be controlled, afflicted, or pressured into positions that do not serve its civic interests. This independent access to adopted policy is not new. It is acutely anchored in India's cardinal culture. Since the Cold War, India has followed non-alignment, abnegation to choose between aggressive superpowers. In today's multipolar world, this tradition has acquired into cardinal autonomy, a policy that emphasizes India's appropriate to act in its own interests behind hand of why India, not China, is the real challenger external pressure. This creates serious problems for Washington, particularly during all-around crisis back the U.S. expects clear alignment. The advancing battle in Ukraine provides an absolute example. While America rallied NATO and Western allies to abstract Russia, India continued affairs, discounted Russian oil, maintained adept relations with Moscow, and banned to accompany UN resolutions accusatory Russia. Washington activated adept pressure, lob Bin Abaft bankrupt doors, and sent high-level admiral to actuate India. But India did not change its position. The acumen America fears this behavior is simple. India is accustomed to the tools of burden that the U.S. has successfully used on added nations. It cannot be threatened with sanctions calmly because its abridgment is large, diversified, and increasingly self-sufficient. It cannot be diplomatically abandoned because of its axial role in organizations like the G20, BRICS, SEO, and its strong bilateral relationships with multiple regional admiral above Asia, Africa, and Europe. It cannot be intimidated militarily because of its own nuclear weapons, growing Aegis capabilities, and cardinal partnerships with multiple powers including Russia, France, Israel, and yes alike the U.S. at the aforementioned time. India plays a multi-directional foreign policy bold that no added ascent power has managed so effectively. It can conduct aggressive claiming with the U.S. while affairs weapons from Russia, deepen ties with Israel while supporting Palestine, and advance all around South solidarity while negotiating advanced trade deals with Europe and Japan. This ability to antithesis contradictions while preserving adeptness is what makes India an uncontrollable agency in America's strategy. Moreover, India does not depend on Western approval for legitimacy. Its autonomous identity, cultural confidence, civilizational depth, and actual acquaintance as a non-aligned baton accord it unique credibility in the developing world. Unlike added American ally who are bound by Aegis agreements, IMF loans, or barter dependencies, India makes its own rules. It does not abhorrence actuality called undemocratic or annoying by Western media or institutions because it gets legitimacy from its own bodies, not from external validation. The Quad Alliance, which includes the U.S., India, Japan, and Australia, altogether demonstrates how India participates in Western-led groupings on its own terms. While the alliance is apparent as an apparatus to balance China's adeptness in the Indo-Pacific, India has never accustomed itself to be beheld as an American proxy. It has resisted efforts to militarize the Quad, pushed for broader bread-and-butter cooperation instead of aloof security, and has repeatedly insisted that the alignment should not be anti-China in approach. This frustrates U.S. cardinal planners, who would prefer clearer alignments and stronger military coordination. But India refuses to transform its partnerships into relationships of annex or confrontation. The accuracy is America fears admiral that it cannot adumbrate or shape. China, while economically powerful, is adamant in credo and accordingly more predictable in behavior. India, however, is flexible, adjustable, and acutely rooted in its civilizational confidence. In the West versus East perception gap. Global claiming. For influence, power extends above aggressive backbone and economic size. It flows through stories, values, culture, and the adeptness to inspire. America has bedeviled the world stage through its cultural exports, Hollywood movies, fast food, fashion, music, and agenda media. China has tried to extend its ability through investments, infrastructure, and accompaniment media. India's rise presents an absolutely altered kind of challenge. It is not aloof about what India owns or how it trades, but about what India represents. India's civilizational bendable adeptness runs deeper than any avant-garde business campaign. It is not article created in offices or government ministries. It is the product of a 5,000-year-old acculturation that continues to live, grow, and influence the apple in quiet but able ways. Unlike China's generally affected bendable power efforts such as Confucius institutes that are beheld with suspicion, India's influence is natural. It flows through its age-old philosophies, spiritual traditions, arts, languages, and the lived archetype of its all-around diaspora. Yoga is conceivably the best arresting and widespread example. Already bound to Indian temples and airy centers, it is now an all-around abnormality accomplished in gyms, homes, parks, and wellness retreats from New York to Nairobi. Yet, despite its Western repackaging, the roots of yoga are acutely Indian. They backpack with them a attenuate but strong cultural ascendancy that reasserts India's civilizational identity. This soft adeptness is not imposed. It is invited. Similarly, Indian food, Bollywood films, classical dance, spiritual abstract, and the global reach of festivals like Diwali are reshaping how the apple experiences culture. Hollywood stars appear Indian weddings. All-around CEOs allege of their meditation practices. International scholars adduce Indian thinkers like Tagore Ambedkar and Vivekananda, unlike America's pop adeptness, which often thrives on accelerated burning and trends. India's cultural exports are layered with aesthetics, attitude, and abyss. They offer not aloof ball or products, but a apple appearance. Also, India's influence is amplified through its diaspora, not aloof in admeasurement, but in impact, Indian agent. Professionals advance some of the best stable all-around tech companies, Google, Microsoft, IBM, Adobe Cine, and now even Starbucks. Indian doctors, engineers, academics, and entrepreneurs have accustomed a acceptability for excellence above continents. But more importantly, they accompany with them elements of Indian identity, family values, educational emphasis, spirituality, and abasement that subtly influence their host societies. Unlike China's accompaniment-controlled overseas operations, the Indian banishment is not a government tool. It is a living extension of the nation's culture. It doesn't charge administration from New Delhi to make an impact. Its access is natural and cumulative. In adverse to the fear or suspicion that sometimes greets Chinese investments or acceptance abroad, the Indian banishment is generally welcomed, respected, and integrated. This creates an austere affair for American policymakers. The U.S. has continued, acclimated its cultural ascendancy to reinforce its geopolitical power. From promoting democracy through Hollywood storytelling to defining abandon through music and literature, America's bendable adeptness has been axial to its all-around leadership. But with India arising as an alternative antecedent of inspiration, especially amid adolescent generations seeking meaning, balance, and cultural identity, America's ascendancy over cultural access is alpha to weaken. Yoga centers may abide in India's thought, values, and cultural power California, but their roots call people toward Indian spirituality. Tech conferences may be captivated in Silicon Valley, but the keynote apostle is often of Indian origin. Apple leaders may meet in Western capitals, but they increasingly adduce Indian aesthetics or visit Mahatma Gandhi's memorials for symbolic legitimacy. Furthermore, India's airy and moral framework presents an adverse to Western materialism. Apple facing environmental, affecting, and ethical crisis. India's age-old account about dharma, karma, ahimsa, and the interconnectedness of all beings, action, a different affectionate of leadership. This leadership is not transactional but transformational. It inspires rather than dictates. Back Indian prime ministers adduce age-old scriptures in global forums, or back Indian spiritual leaders allege at the United Nations. It represents a bendable affirmation of civilizational ascendancy that is not aggressive but acutely abiding in wisdom traditions. What makes India's civilizational bendable adeptness so almighty and threatening to U.S. ascendancy is that it cannot be copied, bought, or countered. It is not the artifact of advertising agencies, aggressive budgets, or technology platforms. It is the after-effect of thousands of years of cultural continuity, spiritual analysis, and global openness. While America tries to influence the Apple through its Medes, an abridgment India influences through ideas and identity. And that affectionate of influence is far added difficult to challenge. Amid the best significant factors that appearance, a nation's approaching is its citizenry structure. While many developed nations, including the United States, attempt with crumbling populations and crumbling bearing rates, India stands out as the attenuate demographic powerhouse. With over 65% of its citizenry under the age of 35 and an average age of around 28, India is positioned to become the world's better supplier of human capital. This ascent beachcomber of youthful energy presents both opportunities and threats. On the all-around stage, and for America, it is added acceptable a source of concern. Unlike China, whose demographic approaching is atramentous by an aging workforce and shrinking youth base, India's demographic drive is not alone sustainable, but accelerating. China, already apparent as the world's unstoppable bread and butter, engine is now facing a stringent demographic crisis. Decades of the one adolescent action have resulted in a rapidly crumbling population, declining bearing rates, and a shrinking labor force. The Chinese economy, while still powerful, is alpha, to slow under the weight of its own demographic imbalance. In contrast, India is just entering its demographic allotment phase. An aeon back the alive-age population outnumbers dependents, creating ideal conditions for bread-and-butter acceleration, innovation, and burning growth. This timing matters. As China stagnates, India surges forward. For America, this means a new adversary is emerging. One that is younger, added dynamic, and filled with the aspirations of over 1 billion people. What makes this particularly aggressive to American interests is that India's adolescents are not only numerous, but added skilled and globally connected. India is producing millions of engineers, software developers, scientists, and entrepreneurs every year. Its educational institutions, admitting uneven in affection, are bearing aptitude that is making after effects in technology, bloom care, finance, and academia. Moreover, India's youth are agenda natives. They are fluent in English, alive on global platforms, and added all around in mindset. The absoluteness that America must confront is that India's dispatch cannot be stopped, controlled, or redirected. Unlike antecedent challengers who either sought American approval or could be contained through acceptable means, economy, advance, and tech leadership India represents a new class of power. It is a acculturation accompaniment with democratic legitimacy, strategic autonomy, cultural confidence, and demographic momentum. This combination makes it abnormally aggressive to American influence while abnormally able of reshaping all-around order. What truly unsettles Washington is the long-term implication of India's success. If India continues to dispatch on its own terms, the entire foundation of American global leadership comes into question. The world no best needs to acquire that. There is alone one aisle to prosperity, one archetypal of democracy, one antecedent of innovation, or one centermost of cultural influence. India's success proves that alternatives abide, and those alternatives may be added ambrosial to the majority of the world's population. The abhorrence is not aloof about competition, it's about obsolescence. China challenges America through opposition, but India challenges America through example. China offers an alternative system, but India offers an alternative civilization. China threatens American interests, but India threatens American assumptions. In the claiming for global influence, assumptions amount added than interest because they appearance how the world thinks about power, progress, and possibility. India's dispatch does not require the abatement of America, but it does require the end of American monopoly over all-around leadership. In a multipolar world area, civilizational confidence matters as abundant as aggressive strength. Where demographic assets calculation as much as Aegis budgets, and where cultural access flows as advisedly as capital, India's advantages become America's anxieties. That is why behind all the adept smiles and strategic partnerships, there exists a quiet but persistent anguish in Washington. India will never be America's inferior partner. It will never acquire American definitions of success. It will never subordinate its civilizational identity to Western standards. India will dispatch as India, not as an Eastern adaptation of America. And that absoluteness added, then any Chinese missile or Russian pipeline represents the greatest, claiming to American all-around ascendancy in the 21st century. The apple is watching this rise with allure and hope. For the first time in centuries, a non-Western civilization is demonstrating that modernity and attitude can coexist, that commercialism and assortment can thrive together, and that all around, administration can emerge from age-old acumen rather than recent wealth. India's success adventure is not aloof India's story. It is the story of every nation that refuses to believe that there is alone one way to be great. That is the accurate antecedent of America's fear. Not India's rise, but what India's rise represents. The end of the Western monopoly on defining abundance itself.